when my daughter looked me straight in the eye and said, "Either you keep my secret or you lose me forever." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask her to repeat herself. I just smiled, reached for my old suitcase, and walked out of the room. Before I go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from? Because what happened next still doesn't feel real, even to me. She thought my smile meant I'd understood her, that I'd accepted the deal. She had seen that smile before, when I covered for her, when I fixed problems she didn't want anyone else to see, when I quietly stepped in so her life could keep moving forward without friction. That smile had always meant compliance. This time it meant goodbye. The kitchen was too quiet after her words landed. The refrigerator hummed. The clock over the sink ticked louder than it ever had before. My coffee sat untouched between us, already cold. She kept her arms folded tight across her chest, like she was bracing for impact. But she never looked scared. She looked prepared, as if she'd rehearsed this moment in her head, and finally decided to pull the trigger. "If this ever gets out," she said softly, not looking at me, "I'm done with you. Completely." She didn't say please. She didn't need to. She believed she didn't have to. And that belief, that certainty, is what cut the deepest. I remember thinking how strange it was that a sentence could end a lifetime of habits. For decades, my instinct had been simple. Protect her, fix things, absorb the damage so she wouldn't have to. That instinct twitched inside me even then, begging me to ask what I could do, how I could help, who I needed to call. But something else rose up faster, something steadier, and it scared me how calm I suddenly felt. I asked her one question, just one, and if I don't... She finally looked at me then. Her eyes were glossy, but not with tears, with resolve. "Then I lose everything," she said. "And so, do you." That was the moment I understood what she was really asking. She wasn't asking me to protect her anymore. She was asking me to disappear. I went down the hallway without another word. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not because I was unsure, but because I knew exactly what I was doing. The suitcase was still on the top shelf of the closet, where it had been for years. The zipper stuck halfway down, just like always. I pulled it free and laid it on the bed, my hands moving automatically while my mind raced ahead to consequences I hadn't fully faced yet. Behind me, I heard her pacing. Once, she stopped at the doorway. She didn't come in. She didn't tell me to stop. She just watched, silent, as if waiting for me to break. I folded shirts slowly. Socks next. My medication. My glasses. The framed photo I kept tucked in the drawer. The one from when she was small and still believed I could fix anything. I hesitated with that one, then slipped it into the side pocket anyway. "You're really doing this?" she asked finally. I zipped the suitcase shut before answering. The sound was louder than it should have been. "I'm choosing who I still am," I said. She laughed, sharp and humorless. "You're choosing pride over your own daughter." I didn't correct her. I didn't explain. Because explanations only work when the other person is willing to hear them. And she wasn't. Not then. Maybe not ever again. I walked past her, suitcase in hand, and opened the front door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and pavement. I paused just long enough to let the moment settle. She didn't follow me. She didn't call my name. She just stood there, arms crossed, convinced this was a bluff that would collapse halfway down the driveway. It didn't. The motel room was small, clean, and painfully neutral. Beige walls, a stiff chair by the window, a bedspread that smelled faintly of detergent and something older underneath. I set the suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that presses in from all sides, waiting to see what you'll do next. My phone buzzed for the first time 10 minutes later. Her name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. Another buzz. Then another. I set the phone face down on the table and went to the window instead. Outside, headlights passed. People going home to places that still felt like theirs. I wondered how long it would take before she realized I wasn't coming back. By morning, there were 6 missed calls. By noon, 12. The messages shifted quickly. First confusion, then irritation, then anger, Each voicemail ended the same way, an accusation wrapped in panic, insisting I was overreacting, misunderstanding, being dramatic. None of them mentioned the secret, not directly, as if naming it out loud might crack something fragile that was barely holding together. That afternoon, my phone rang again, a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, the voice on the other end sounded cautious, professional, curious. They were asking questions, not accusing, not yet, just noticing inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored anymore. I sat there, phone in my hand, and felt the first real tremor of fear, not for myself, but for what was coming for her. She had believed silence would save her. She had believed I was a lock, holding everything shut. What she didn't understand was this. The truth doesn't need permission to surface. It just needs time. And as I stared at that phone, listening to the message again, I realized something else. Something that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. The secret she'd asked me to keep hadn't just trapped her. It had already started reaching for someone else. That was when I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't return the call. Not because I was hiding, but because I needed to understand the shape of what was coming before I stepped into it. Silence, when used carefully, can be a form of listening. And I had a feeling the world was about to start talking. That evening, I walked down to the diner across the street from a motel. It was a kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and familiarity, where nobody rushed you out of booth because they assumed you'd eventually leave on your own. I ordered soup I barely touched and watched people come and go, wondering how many of them carried secrets that felt too heavy to name. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't my daughter. It was a text from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Just one line. Is everything okay with her? I stared at the screen longer than I should have. That was the first crack. Small, almost invisible, but unmistakable once you noticed it. Someone else was aware. Someone else was connecting dots. And whatever my daughter had been so desperate to keep buried was no longer confined to our conversation in that quiet kitchen. I paid the bill and walked back to the motel, every step measured. By the time I reached my room, there were 3 more missed calls and a voicemail that made my stomach tighten. Her voice was different now. Lower. Faster. You need to call me back, she said. Right now. Please. Things are starting to shift. Shift. That was the word she used when she didn't want to say unravel. I sat on the bed and replayed the message twice. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the old folder on my laptop, the one I kept telling myself I no longer needed. Inside were documents, notes, copies of emails I'd saved without really knowing why. Back then, I told myself it was just good record keeping, a habit from a lifetime of being careful. Now it felt like instinct. The first time I'd helped her, it hadn't felt like helping her lie. It felt like helping her survive a mistake. She was young, terrified, convinced one wrong mark on her record would ruin everything she'd worked for. She cried at my kitchen table that night too, hands shaking, voice breaking in the same places. I remembered how quickly I'd stepped in, how natural it felt to smooth things over, to make a call, to explain something away. I'd told myself it was temporary. She'd fix it. She always did. But temporary things have a way of becoming foundations when no one challenges them. As I scrolled the files, I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. Dates lining up too neatly. Corrections layered over corrections. A story revised just enough times to feel solid, until you look too closely. And now, someone was looking closely. My phone rang again. Her name. I answered this time, but I didn't speak first. Why won't you just say something? She demanded, skipping past hello. Why won't you tell them they're wrong? Who is they? I asked quietly. There was a pause. Too long. It doesn't matter, she snapped. What matters is that you promised. You always promised you'd have my back. I closed my eyes. I promised to protect you, I said, not to erase myself. Her breath hitched. You're exaggerating. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Because exaggeration was how this had grown. Small adjustments. Gentle nudges away from the truth. Each one justified. Each one survivable. until the lie became the thing holding everything else upright. If you don't step in, she said, her voice sharp now, people will think things about me that aren't true. I thought of the voicemail, the careful questions, the way curiosity turns into certainty once it's fed. What if they're already thinking them? I asked. She didn't answer. And in that silence, I heard fear for the first time. Real fear, not the strategic kind. The kind that comes when you realize the story you've been telling yourself no longer fits the facts. You're doing this to punish me, she said finally. No, I replied. I'm doing this because I can't carry it anymore. She hung up on me. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her at 5 years old, running toward me with scraped knees and tears, trusting completely that I could make the pain stop. I'd been good at that once. Too good. Somewhere along the way, fixing had replaced teaching, and silence had replaced honesty. The next morning, I woke to another voicemail. Not from her, from someone else. They were polite, calm. They asked if I'd be willing to clarify a few things. Just routine, they said. Just tying up loose ends. Loose ends. I sat there for a long time after the call ended, staring at the wall, feeling the weight of decision I'd already made press harder against my chest. I knew what would happen if I stayed quiet. I knew what would happen if I spoke. Neither path spared her completely, but only one spared me. Around noon, my phone lit up again. This time it was a text. If this comes out, I will never forgive you. I read it twice, then a third time, and something inside me settled, not with relief, but with clarity. Forgiveness, I realized, had already been replaced by leverage. Love had been turned into a threat. Before I could respond, another message came through. Short, blunt, they're coming to you next. I felt my pulse jump, because if that was true, then the moment she'd been trying to lay had finally arrived. And when they asked their questions, silence would no longer be neutral. It would be an answer all by itself. I didn't reply to her last message, not because I didn't care, but because anything I said would have been used as proof, twisted into confirmation that I was still part of the lie. Silence, at this point, was the only honest thing I had left. That afternoon, the knock finally came. Not loud, not aggressive, just firm enough to let me know it wouldn't go away if I ignored it. I stood on the motel side of the door for a long moment, hand resting on the handle, listening to my own breathing. This was the moment I'd been circling since the kitchen, since the suitcase, since her ultimatum. I opened the door, knowing there was no stepping back from whatever came next. They were polite, almost careful. Two people, professional smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. They introduced themselves, explained why they were there, asked if we could talk. I let them in. The room felt smaller instantly, like the walls had leaned in to listen. They didn't accuse. They asked questions. The kind that sound harmless until you realize each one is placed exactly where it needs to be. Dates, confirmations, explanations that had been accepted before, now revisited with a different lens. I answered what I could honestly and paused where honesty would turn into exposure. Each pause stretched a little longer than the last. At one point, one of them leaned forward and said, "We're just trying to understand how certain discrepancies were overlooked." Overlooked. That word again. The same one I'd used all those years ago when I convinced myself this was temporary. I felt the familiar urge rise in my chest, the instinct to smooth, to redirect, to protect. It surprised me how quickly that urge died. "I don't know," I said instead. The room went quiet. Not uncomfortable. Not yet, but alert. I could feel the shift, the subtle recalibration that happens when people realize the story they expected isn't being handed to them. They thanked me for my time and said they might be in touch. As they left, one of them glanced back at me, expression unreadable. When the door closed, I sank into the chair by the window and let the silence settle. My phone buzzed immediately. She must have been watching, waiting, sensing movement she couldn't see. "What did you say?" she demanded when I answered. "I told the truth," I replied. She laughed, sharp and brittle. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have left." Her voice dropped, dangerous now. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" "Yes," I said. And for the first time since this began, I meant it. She hung up without another word. The fallout didn't come all at once. It never does. It arrived in pieces, each one heavier than the last. Whispers, cancel plans, people asking questions that weren't really questions at all. The narrative she'd built so carefully began to tilt, then wobble. And instead of looking at the cracks, she looked at me. She showed up at the motel that evening. I hadn't expected that. Not yet. She stood in the doorway like she didn't recognize me, like I was a stranger who borrowed her father's face. Her eyes were red, but dry, controlled. "You could still fix this," she said, stepping inside without being invited. I didn't offer her a seat. I didn't raise my voice. I just waited. "You just need to say one thing," she continued. "One sentence. Something that makes them stop." "And then what?" I asked. She hesitated. "Just a fraction. Then we go back to normal." Normal. The word landed wrong. There was no normal to go back to. There never had been. Just momentum and denial moving in the same direction. "I won't do it," I said quietly. Her face changed then. The mask slipped. "After everything I've done for you," she snapped. I almost smiled at that. Almost. "After everything I've done for you," I corrected. She stared at me like she didn't know how to respond to that version of the story. Then her shoulders sagged, and for a moment she looked very young, very tired. "If this destroys me," she whispered, "that's on you." I didn't answer, because we both knew that wasn't true. She left without slamming the door. That scared me more than anger would have. It told me she was calculating, not grieving. And when someone stops pleading and starts planning, the worst is usually still ahead. The next day, the story shifted again. This time publicly. Not with facts, but with insinuations. I heard it through other people. Concerned voices asking if I was okay, if I'd been under stress lately, if I'd been confused. She wasn't denying anything outright. She was planting doubt. About me. It was clever, cruel, effective. By evening, my phone was filled with messages from people who suddenly wanted to check in. I recognized the pattern immediately. Undermine the source. Question the witness. Make the truth look unreliable by making the messenger look unstable. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in my hands, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not fear, relief. Because if she was doing this, it meant the truth was close. Too close for comfort. Late that night, another message came through. This one wasn't from her. It was from someone involved on the other side of things. Someone who shouldn't have known my number. "We have enough now," it read. "One last confirmation will close the loop." I stared at the words until the screen dimmed. One last confirmation. That was it. The final decision point. The moment every other moment had been leading toward. If I answered, everything would move forward. Irreversibly. If I didn't, the lie might survive a little longer. My phone buzzed again. This time it was her. Just one line. "Please, don't do this." I held the phone in both hands, feeling the weight of a lifetime press into my palms. And for the first time, I understood something with absolute clarity. Keeping her secret wouldn't save her anymore. It would only destroy me. I didn't respond to either message right away. I set the phone down on the small table by the window and stood there, staring out at the parking lot, as if the answer might be written somewhere between the faded lines and the oil stains. Cars came and went. Lives moved forward. Mine felt suspended, balanced on the edge of a choice that had been years in the making. For a long time, I believed that being a good father meant absorbing impact, standing between your child and the consequences of their decisions, taking the hit so they didn't have to. That belief had shaped my entire adult life. And now it was asking for one final sacrifice. Not my money, not my time, but my integrity. I picked the phone back up and read her message again. "Please, don't do this." She hadn't said sorry. She hadn't said she was wrong. She was still asking me to save her from something she refused to face herself, and that, more than anything else, told me how this would end. I replied to the other message first. Just a few words. Clear, honest, enough. I won't interfere. My thumb hovered for a second before I sent it. Once it was gone, there would be no retrieving it, no softening the edges, no rewriting the story. I press send. The screen went still. Nothing exploded. Nothing dramatic happened. The world didn't end. It simply continued. That's the thing about decisive moments. They rarely feel as dramatic as you expect. The weight comes afterward. Her call came less than a minute later. I didn't answer. Then another, and another. When I finally picked up, her voice came through fractured, stripped of its earlier control. "You promise me," she said. "I promise to love you." I replied, "Not to disappear for you. You're choosing strangers over your own daughter." I closed my eyes. "I'm choosing truth over fear." She went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that signals surrender. The kind that means she was recalculating. "You know what they're going to say about me," she whispered. "You know what this will do." "Yes," I said. "And you're okay with that?" I swallowed. "I'm not okay with any of this." She laughed then, a sound that made my stomach turn. "You think this makes you righteous?" "No," I said. "It makes me done." She hung up on me, hard this time. The next 2 days passed in a blur of waiting. Not the frantic kind, the heavy kind, like standing under a low sky, knowing a storm is inevitable, but unable to tell exactly when it will break. I didn't leave the motel much. I didn't answer unnecessary calls. I watched the news, scrolled aimlessly, listened to conversations that had nothing to do with me, and yet somehow felt like they were circling closer. Then it started, not loudly, not publicly at first, just enough for me to feel it. Meetings she'd been part of postponed without explanation. A professional page quietly taken offline. An invitation rescinded. Each small change stacked onto the last until the picture became impossible to ignore. The structure she'd built her life on was starting to give way. She showed up again on the third evening. This time she didn't knock. She stood outside the door, knocking once, then waiting. I opened it slowly. She looked different. Smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. Like someone who'd been holding a breath too long and was finally running out of air. "They know," she said without preamble. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat across from each other in the same 2 chairs I'd been using to think myself into circles for days. She kept her eyes on the floor. "They're saying things," she continued. "They're asking questions I can't answer." I waited. "You could still help," she said, quieter now. "You could say you were confused, that you misunderstood what happened back then." There it was, the last escape route, the final lie, and I saw it for what it was, a way to trade my credibility for her comfort one more time. "I won't," I said. Her head snapped up. "Why are you doing this to me?" I leaned forward, resting my hands on my knees. "I'm not doing this to you. I'm refusing to do it for you." She stared at me, searching my face for something she could use. When she didn't find it, her expression hardened. "If I lose everything," she said, "I will never forgive you." The words landed, but they didn't have the power they once did. Not because they didn't hurt, but because I finally understood the cost of earning her forgiveness. "I know," I said. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. "You're not my father anymore." I didn't respond, because that threat had already been made and carried out. She left without looking back. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a new message. Not from her, from the same number as before. "We're moving forward." I stared at the words until they blurred. That was it, the point of no return. Whatever happened next would happen without my involvement, without my protection, without my silence cushioning the fall. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Relief mixed with grief. Freedom braided with loss. But somewhere beneath it all, another question began to take shape. One I hadn't allowed myself to ask yet. When the truth finally landed, and her world collapsed around her, what would be left between us? The truth didn't arrive like an explosion. It never does. It arrived like gravity. Quiet, unavoidable, and suddenly impossible to ignore. I woke up the next morning to a world that felt subtly different, like something essential had shifted while I was asleep. My phone was already buzzing, not with accusations or demands, but with confirmations. Meetings canceled, statements released, silence where confidence used to live. She didn't call that day, or the next. For the first time since this began, there was nothing from her at all. No anger, no pleading, no threats, just absence. And I realized how much noise she'd filled my life with until the moment it stopped. People started reaching out, carefully at first, then more openly, not asking me to explain, but asking if I was all right, if I needed anything, if I'd been holding too much for too long. It was strange how quickly the narrative corrected itself once the facts were no longer being bent to protect someone's image. Stranger still how little I had to say to make that happen. A week later, I heard the full version of what had come out, not from her, from someone else. The inconsistencies, the records that didn't line up, the questions that finally got honest answers. The structure she'd built on half-truths and borrowed credibility folded inward, exactly the way fragile things always do when they're asked to support real weight. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved the way people expect you to when the truth wins. I felt tired, and sad, and strangely light, like I'd finally set something down that I'd been carrying without realizing how heavy it was. She called me that night. Her name on the screen made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't prepared for. I answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Not broken, just stripped of its armor. "It's over," she said. I didn't ask what she meant. We both knew. "They're done with me," she continued. The story I told myself, it doesn't work anymore. I waited. "You could have stopped this," she said softly, not accusing, just stating a fact as she saw it. "Yes," I replied. There was a long pause. "Why didn't you?" I thought about all the answers I could give, about integrity, about truth, about boundaries. None of them felt honest enough on their own. So I chose the simplest one. "Because I wanted you to have a chance to be real," I said, even if it hurt. She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice trembled. "I don't know who I am without it." "That's the part you were always meant to figure out," I said. Another silence. This one different. Not charged, not dangerous, just heavy with everything we hadn't said over the years. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she admitted. I swallowed. "I know. And I don't know if I can forgive myself," she added. I closed my eyes. That's where it has to start. The call ended gently. No slam phones. No final declarations. Just two people stepping away from a conversation that had run out of safe ground. Weeks passed. Life settled into a quieter rhythm. I moved out of the motel and into a small place that felt like mine in a way my old home hadn't for years. I woke up without bracing myself for the next crisis. I drank coffee without waiting for my phone to buzz. I slept through the night. People assume the hardest part of setting boundaries is the moment you set them. They're wrong. The hardest part is living with the empty space afterward. The silence where obligation used to sit. The absence of being needed at any cost. It takes time to realize that space isn't loss. It's room. She sent me a message one morning. Just a few words. I started telling the truth today. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I'm glad." That was it. No promises. No expectations. Just honesty. Finally moving in the right direction. I don't know what our relationship will look like a year from now. Or 5. Maybe it will heal into something smaller, but stronger. Maybe it will remain distant, careful, unfinished. I've learned not to force outcomes that belong to someone else. What I do know is this. Love that demands silence isn't love. It's fear dressed up as loyalty. And choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop disappearing. If you're listening to this and facing a choice like mine, where love is being used as leverage, ask yourself one question. What is this costing you to keep? Before you go, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? And if this story resonated with you, like the video, subscribe for the next one, and share where you're watching from. Because sometimes the bravest thing a parent can do isn't to protect their child from consequences. It's to step out of the way and let the truth do its work.